The first shot tore through the canvas wall just inches above her head, spraying dust and shredded fabric into the air. The second one hit the supply crate behind her, exploding glass vials into a mist of morphine and saline. For a split second, the Navy SEALs inside the field hospital froze, stunned that the enemy had breached what was supposed to be neutral ground. And in that heartbeat of chaos, their quiet combat nurse did something none of them expected. Before we go further, if you believe in courage, in kindness under fire, and in second chances that change lives, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us who we can be when the world falls apart. The field hospital had been set up on the edge of a shattered village in southern Afghanistan, a temporary sanctuary stitched together with canvas, aluminum poles, and the stubborn hope that the wounded deserved mercy. The Navy SEAL platoon rotated in and out after night raids, bringing with them the smell of cordite and sand, the weight of things they couldn't talk about. Inside those thin walls, life and death were negotiated in whispers and steady hands. Petty Officer Second Class Emma Cole was their nurse. At least, that's what they thought she was. She was small compared to most of the men around her, with sunburned cheeks and a braid tucked neatly under her helmet. She moved with quiet efficiency, checking 4 lines, monitoring vitals, cleaning wounds with a gentleness that seemed almost out of place in a war zone. She rarely spoke about herself. When the SEALs swapped stories about training at BUD/S or past deployments, she listened with a faint smile, as if she belonged and didn't at the same time. They assumed she was Navy through and through. The caduceus patch on her uniform said, medical, and that was enough for them. In a place where tomorrow wasn't promised, nobody dug too deep into anyone's past. But Emma carried more than gauze and antibiotics. She carried secrets stitched into her identity, secrets born years earlier under a different uniform. Long before she stood in that field hospital, she had stood on the yellow footprints at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island. She had endured the screaming drill instructors, the endless runs, the rifle qualification, and the pride of earning the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. She had been a United States Marine before she ever became a nurse. Her path had shifted after a deployment that left her with more emotional scars than she could admit. She had seen a village reduced to rubble and a child caught in crossfire. The memory of that small, lifeless hand in hers had followed her home. She realized then that she didn't want to carry a rifle anymore. She wanted to carry something that healed. So she applied for a medical program, transferred branches, and buried the Marine in her beneath scrubs and silence. She never mentioned it to the SEALs. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't need the extra weight of their expectations. In the field hospital, she was just document that was enough. Until the day the armed men stormed the camp. It had started as a routine afternoon. 2 SEALs were on cots recovering from shrapnel wounds. Another lay sedated after emergency surgery. The sun outside baked the sand into a blinding white glare. Then the perimeter alarms blared, short, sharp bursts that meant contact. Gunfire erupted from the western edge of the compound. The dull thud of mortars followed, shaking the ground beneath their boots. The security detail rushed out, weapons raised. Inside the hospital tent, Emma's hands didn't tremble. She secured the 4 bags and checked the wounded. Then a truck bomb detonated at the outer barrier. The blast wave hit like a giant's fist, flattening sections of the perimeter fence and sending a cloud of smoke rolling toward the medical tents. Armed insurgents poured through the breach, firing indiscriminately. They weren't just attacking soldiers. They were aiming for the hospital. War had no rules here. The first rounds ripped through canvas. A Navy corpsman dropped beside her, grazed in the shoulder. One of the SEALs, barely able to stand, reached for his rifle from the cot. Emma's mind switched gears. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a Marine. She shoved the nearest gurney against the tent flap to create cover and barked orders with a command voice that cut through the panic. The tone was different, sharper, edged with steel. The SEAL nearest her blinked in surprise but obeyed instantly. She grabbed the fallen corpseman's rifle, checked the chamber in one smooth motion, and moved toward the torn section of canvas. The smell of gunpowder mingled with antiseptic, a sickening combination of destruction and healing colliding in one space. Outside, 2 insurgents were sprinting toward the medical tent, clearly intending to eliminate the wounded and anyone treating them. Emma stepped into the opening, braced against the metal support pole, and fired controlled bursts. Years of muscle memory guided her. The recoil felt like an old friend she had sworn never to see again. The first man dropped. The second dove behind a crate, returning fire. Bullets snapped past her ear, shredding more canvas. She advanced, low and deliberate, cutting off his angle. When he rose to shoot again, she ended it. Inside, the SEAL stared at her with something close to disbelief. This was the quiet nurse who hummed country songs while stitching wounds. The one who stayed up through the night monitoring vitals. The one who slipped energy bars into their packs before missions. Now she moved like she had trained for war her entire life. Because she had. More insurgents breached the hospital's rear entrance. Emma directed the least injured SEAL to secure the eastern side while she dragged a supply cart to block the rear flap. A grenade clattered inside, rolling across the dirt floor. Time seemed to slow. Without hesitation, she lunged, scooped it up, and hurled it back through the opening. The explosion outside rattled the tent and silenced the immediate threat. Her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She checked on the sedated patient, shielding him with her body as stray rounds pierced the tent walls. Minutes stretched into eternity. The firefight raged across the compound, but the hospital held. Reinforcements arrived, cutting down the remaining attackers. Eventually, the gunfire faded into sporadic echoes, then into ringing silence. Dust settled slowly over the wounded. Emma sank onto an overturned crate, chest heaving. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind the ache of memories she had tried to outrun. She looked at the rifle in her hands and felt the old conflict stirring inside her, the Marine who fought and the nurse who healed. A senior SEAL approached her, blood streaking his sleeve but eyes sharp with respect. He asked her where she had learned to shoot like that. She didn't answer immediately. She just reached up and pulled from her pocket a small, worn token she carried everywhere, the eagle, globe, and anchor. She turned it over in her palm, then closed her fingers around it. The realization hit them all at once. Their combat nurse had once worn the uniform of the United States Marine Corps. No one mocked her for keeping it secret. No one questioned her loyalty. Instead, something shifted in the room. They saw her not just as the one who patched them up, but as someone who had walked through fire long before they met her. That night, as the wounded stabilized and helicopters prepared to evacuate the most critical cases, the platoon commander sat beside her in the dim light of a lantern. He didn't press her for details. He didn't ask why she had left the Marines. He simply thanked her, for saving their lives, for holding the line, for being more than anyone expected. Emma finally allowed herself to speak about the child she couldn't save years ago, about the guilt that had driven her to trade her rifle for a stethoscope. She admitted that she had believed becoming a nurse was her way of making amends with a world torn apart by violence. But that day had taught her something else. Healing and fighting weren't opposites. Sometimes protecting life required standing between it and those who would destroy it. Over the following weeks, word spread quietly through the unit. The SEALs trained harder around the hospital perimeter. They treated Emma not with fragile reverence, but with earned camaraderie. She was one of them in every sense that mattered. Yet she never stopped being document. She still changed dressings with gentle hands. She still stayed awake long after midnight to monitor fevers. She still whispered reassurances to men who woke from nightmares, reminding them they were alive. The attack became part of their shared history, a story told not with bravado, but with gratitude. Months later, when the deployment ended and the unit rotated home, Emma stood on the tarmac watching the sun rise over American soil. The wind tugged at her uniform, and she felt the weight of both identities resting comfortably on her shoulders. Marine. Nurse. Protector. Healer. They were never separate to begin with. Before this story comes to an end, I want to ask you something from the heart. If Emma's courage, her struggle for redemption, and her strength under fire moved you even a little, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. And right now, before the ending, comment the word honor if you believe true strength lies in protecting others. Because stories like this deserve to be remembered. Emma eventually received a commendation, though she never sought recognition. The citation spoke of bravery under fire, of decisive action that saved multiple lives. It didn't mention the years of guilt she carried or the quiet nights spent questioning her worth. It didn't need to. What mattered was that in the moment it counted most, she chose courage. Years later, when she trained new medical recruits, she told them that fear was natural. That doubt was human. But that compassion was a weapon stronger than any rifle. She taught them that being strong didn't mean abandoning gentleness, and that sometimes the world would try to define them by only one part of who they were. They didn't have to choose. On a shelf in her home, the eagle, globe, and anchor rests beside her nursing credentials. Not as competing symbols, but as chapters of the same story. A story about a woman who refused to let her past define her limits. A story about men who learned that heroes don't always look the way you expect. And a story about a field hospital that stood firm because one quiet nurse remembered who she had always been. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Engage with this video, share your thoughts below, and help spread a message of courage and compassion. Someone out there needs to be reminded that their past does not disqualify them from doing extraordinary things. Because sometimes, the person saving lives in the shadows is the one who once stood on the front lines, and never truly left.